Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and tonight we're talking to Dr. Peter McCue, who has a new book out. We've spoken to Peter a number of times about different books he's published over the years. Tonight we're going to be talking about curses, coincidences, and malign influences, a parapsychological perspective. He's speculating on whether curses work and if negative thoughts are enough to bring down one's enemies. I suppose that's what curses are. So, uh, good evening, Peter. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you very much.
Hopefully, you're keeping well, and excellent to see that you have a new book out. What was it that brought you to want to be talking about curses in this day and age?
Well, I was aware of some cases where there seemed to be a prima facie case, at least, that malevolent thoughts or negative thoughts could have a bad effect on people. I'm also aware, of course, of evidence from parapsychology for psychokinesis, that is a sort of mind over matter effect, and perhaps telepathic influence as well. Um, so I thought it was an interesting area, so I looked at it. Of course, when you look at actual alleged cases, it's a mixture of terms of credibility, in terms of the level of evidence. There's this usual sort of mix and uncertainties. But I think unless you're prepared to live with a lot of uncertainty, you shouldn't really even get into the paranormal field,
Mm,
because there's so much of uncertainty. And I mean, it's using the word alleged, reported, purported, and so on can sound a bit boring, and I try to not do it too much, but it has to be there, considered all the time, really. And
okay.
unfortunately, so many authors are rather vague in their presentation of details. You don't sometimes know whether the people that are being referred to, the names given, are real or not, because sometimes people use pseudonyms without telling
Mm,
you, which is bad practice, I think.
mm,
Um, Maybe there's a lack of corroboration, and so it's hard to know. On the other hand, I think it's daft and sort of foolish to dismiss all cases and reports just because of evidential weaknesses. Um, if a woman's been raped, and just because the evidence isn't sort of hard and fast for it to get a conviction, I don't think that entitles us to infer that she hasn't been raped. From that point of view, I think we've got to be balanced.
mm. So, let's sort of start off. How do you define a curse?
Well, traditionally, I think people would think of a curse as someone's maybe annoyed someone, then the person who's originating the curse performs some sort of ritual, a symbolic ritual. It could be writing down certain words, or creating an effigy of the disliked person, sticking pins in him or her, um, something like that. What I call a cursing ritual, which is then supposed to sort of have a paranormal effect, which has a negative influence on the recipient. Um, However, I think it's worth considering the possibility that the cursing ritual, a formal ritual, isn't necessary to have an adverse effect. It may be sufficient just to have a negative intentions towards someone. For instance, if I fall out with a colleague at work and I can't stand the blighter, and I actually think to myself, I hope he drops dead, or I hope he gets cancer, or something horrible like that,
Mm,
that may be sufficient without actually performing a ritual. A third possibility I think we have to consider, it's not a very pleasant one, but is that just having negative feelings about someone could itself um, have a negative influence, even without actively wishing anything malignant. Um, so I think we've got these three possibilities. So I tend to use in the book, I tend to use the word curse in a kind of broad sense, not
mm.
necessarily implying that there's a definite cursing ritual, but looking at the question of whether malign feelings or negative feelings towards people, um, whether or not there's a ritual, can have an effect.
Mm. So it's not specifically, we don't have to have a voodoo. Well, you're not talking about sort of a voodoo doll or casting spells or anything like that. It's just the idea that you're putting something out there, whatever whatever method you're doing, that is how you're calling the curse. Like I curse you, or I have to do
That's right.
something else. You're sort of taking a broad approach to that.
A broad approach, because if you look at many reports of supposed curses, There is often no clear-cut evidence of a cursing ritual. For instance, the Kennedy family, the political family in the United States, it's often said that they were a cursed family because they suffered a whole sort of tranche of tragedies. But people, when they say that, aren't sort of referring to a specific action where some sorcerer went through a ritual. The curse is an inference based on a disproportionate amount of bad luck.
Well, it's the opposite of being blessed. It's
Yes,
being cursed. If
yes,
someone says
yes,
you're blessed with riches, well, you're cursed with misfortune.
yes.
And I think that also comes. I mean, something you were saying before. You said that about, and we'll get into this because I think it's actually probably the point that you're trying to make. That even just having bad thoughts about someone. So if someone was not well, I'm sending you my good thoughts. I'm praying for you. My good intentions are there. So you're saying, if I'm, you might not say that to someone, that I'm sending you my bad thoughts, but you might think that about someone. I don't like that bloke. Stuff him or whatever. Right? Whatever you want to say. It's a curse, isn't
Well,
it? You curse
that's
someone.
it. And there is evidence from parapsychological research. By parapsychology, I'm referring to experimental psychical research, sort of laboratory-based type psychical research. There is some evidence suggesting that healing intentions can be beneficial. Let's say you've got a group of 100 patients. You divide them randomly into two groups. One is the experimental group, one's the control group, and then people are asked to pray for or send healing intentions towards the experimental group. Maybe seeing photographs of the people concerned, maybe, and then you compare the outcome of the two groups, and you may find that there's a significantly better outcome with the people, the recipients of the healing intentions. So there is this evidence. So as you say, it may be that having kind of benevolent thoughts and feelings about people, someone can help someone, and conversely, the opposite may be the case. And even if we aren't consciously wishing ill on someone, I mean, we all have know people we don't really like, and so, but we don't necessarily actively wish misfortune on them, but it could be that misfortune is slightly more likely to occur to them, or even much more likely to occur to them, if people actually don't like them.
Yeah. So, in your book, you talk about a number of different types of curses.
Yes.
Can you maybe outline what you mean by that? Because you say there's a type one, there's a type two.
Yeah,
Explain what that means.
I've distinguished it between what I call type 1 curses and type 2 curses. A type 1 curse is one where the recipients of the curse, if you like, the victims, experience distressing paranormal phenomena. Imagine, for instance, that you are visiting an ancient site, maybe a cairn or something like that, and you remove a stone from that place. Maybe you're not supposed to do it. You probably aren't supposed to do it, but you do it surreptitiously. You take the thing home, and then poltergeist phenomena break out in your home. That would be an instance of what I call a type 1 curse. A type 2 curse is where the the person experiences, or the group of people, could be a family, experiences bad luck. It could be a succession of misfortunes, maybe losing a job, financial problems, illness.
Mm.
The problem is that with this so-called type 2 curses, it's very hard to know for sure in any given instance whether the the incidents are really linked to
Mm.
any kind of malevolent thought or action, as opposed to being coincidental. The problem is, of course, that misfortune in life isn't. Doesn't seem to be a universal law decreeing that we all have a fair share, as it were, of
Yeah.
misery, by chance or by other factors. Some people will have a lot more misfortune than others, and it may not be anything to do with the curse. However, just a final thought before I hand back to you. I would say that if you're looking at evidence of supposed type 2 curses, the case for such a curse may be stronger if the bad luck follows very quickly after the supposed curse is
Mm.
implemented. If
Yeah.
it occurs 10 years later, it's very hard to know whether it's
Yeah.
anything. Yes.
Yeah, I use an example. Like I went to the Valley of the Kings. I was in Egypt, and I actually went into Tutankhamun's tomb. Now that's one of the famous curses, the curse of Tutankhamun.
Yes.
Now that trip went all right. When I got home, uh, a couple of things happened which weren't so great for me. I'm not going to go into what they are, but they weren't great for me. Now I don't necessarily think that there was any connection to it, but it's funny that it happened afterwards. But it might have happened if I hadn't gone there. It probably would have happened if I had not gone there. So it's one of these things that there are probably bad things that had happened to me before I went there. It's just that these kind of things highlight the connection there, isn't it? So if you took the stone from the can, which I didn't take from Tutankhamun's tomb, but if I did it just highlights the bad thing, because you might have fallen off, you know, you might have walked off the side of a, what do you call it, a ledge or something like that, just after someone, I curse you for doing this. It might have happened anyway, but just because they did that beforehand, you connect the two. So I
Yes.
just wonder, do you look at that kind of thing? I mean, some of these things are just coincidental, and there might be 20 things, bad thing happens to you, and that if someone does something before one of them, you say, well, that was the result of that.
Yeah, I do look at that, and I mentioned the Tutankhamun case in the book. A number of people did die relatively soon after the tombs opened. Um, and however, it's conjectural whether, there was any causal connection or whether they would have died anyway. I think, as I say, if the misfortune follows quickly, and there's a case I'll perhaps mention if you give me a chance later on, where misfortune did very closely follow what could be regarded as a sort of a potential cursing event,
Mm,
which gives a stronger case for a type 2 curse. But it's probably, in terms of this distinction between type 1 and type 2, it's probably easier to substantiate a type 1 curse. Having said that, though, I think this is a somewhat arbitrary distinction, and it may be that if curses, in a sense, are real, they can include both type 1 and type 2 elements.
mm. So what do you want to go on with what you were going to say? You wanted to explain something?
Yeah, well, I can perhaps cite a couple of cases which
That'd
might
be great. If you
illustrate.
could give us some examples, that'd be lovely.
Yes, I'll just glance to my Q notes here. The first one concerns a couple called Sir Alexander Hayes Seaton and his wife, Lady Zayla Seaton. They were born in the early part of the 20th century. Neither of them lived very long, actually. I think this was their first marriage in each case. They subsequently divorced, and I think they both had one or two further marriages, at least one. I think it was two further marriages in each case. I won't be too categorical if I'm wrong there, but in 1936, the couple were in Egypt, and I think they spent some months in Egypt. And at one point, they visited a particular tomb, an ancient tomb, and Zayla, the wife, surreptitiously stole a bone. It was a sacrum, a bone from the sort of back of the pelvis, from an old sort of skeleton. Obviously, she wasn't supposed to take the bone, but she did. Her
No.
husband didn't know about this at the time, and perhaps wasn't too pleased when he did find out about it. But she took the bone, and the couple returned to their home in Scotland, Learmonth Gardens, which I've sent you a picture of,
Okay.
um, and Zayla sort of seemed to treat the object as something of a trophy. Um, but quite soon after they came back, strange phenomena occurred. They had visitors. This is, I think, towards the end of 1936. And when the visitors were leaving, a piece of the roof parapet fell down near the people at the exit to the house, not too far away. Then, not long after, there was a succession of incidents involving noises and minor poltergeist type disturbances, um, generally or wholly centering around the bone.
Mm,
Um, and at one point, Alexander decided he was going to burn the bone. And, I think he was exasperated with the phenomenon. And his wife flew into a rage. I think she was rather attached to having this thing. And he went out to his club for some drinks. And but they had the bone for a bit longer, and further disturbances occurred. Eventually, it was arranged for Alexander's uncle, who was a Father Benedict at Fort Augustus Abbey in the Highlands of Scotland, to come to the house and to carry out a ceremony. I don't know whether it was a full
Mm.
exorcism or something more of a blessing. The bone was blessed and then incinerated by Alexander Seton, whereupon, after which there were no further poltergeist type phenomena. However, in describing this period in his life, Seton reported that trouble always seemed to be around the corner, which perhaps suggests there could have been if we attribute these various things to a curse, it could be there was a type 2 element, a bad luck aspect to the thing, as well as the poltergeist phenomena. The problem is, as with all these cases, is interpretation. I mean, it's very, it might be easy to say that the bone was cursed. It's a kind of classic story. They bring the bone back. They're being punished for having, or at least Zayla has created offence, and a curse is enacted. But I think the Setons' marriage was strained at the time. It wasn't too long after that they were divorced. It could be that the poltergeist phenomena had nothing to do with the curse. Another possibility, which I mentioned briefly in the book, is that if we assume that there's a sort of a tricksterish intelligence behind paranormal phenomena, the tricksterous intelligence may adapt its machinations, its displays, to current folklore themes. It may even use them for the purpose of deception. In other words, let's say this intelligence wanted to give the impression that there was an ancient curse being enacted. It could orchestrate poltergeist phenomena around the stone, around the bone, which would give the misleading impression, if this hypothesis is correct, that the phenomena were actually related to a curse, when in fact they were more related to tensions in the marriage or other factors. So it's hard to be sure, and I think this is where one has to be very careful in drawing inferences. So that's an example of a type 1 curse, as I say, where paranormal phenomena follow from the supposed enactment of the curse. A type 2 case, this is one taken from a book by David Weatherly, who's written a couple of books at least on what he called black-eyed children. And this is a phenomenon that some people claim is an urban myth, going back to the 1990s, but Weatherly would say that there are cases earlier than that, and it's not. Just to before I give the specific example, just a general idea of what black-eyed kids are, or children. A typical case might be someone at home alone in the evening. There's a knocking at the door, not a ringing of the bell, which one might have expected, but a knocking at the door. The person goes to the door, opens it, and sees 2 children, perhaps aged 12 to 14, something like that. And one of the children acts as the spokesman and says, asks the person to let them in, for some kind of reason, maybe to make a phone call or watch some television. Not a very convincing reason for kind of coming to a stranger's house. The householder then inquires further, and the spokesman doesn't really elaborate much more. There's quite a bit of repetition. Look, mister, we just need to come in. We need you to invite us in, without really explaining what they're doing. Then the children look up, and the householder notices that the kids have jet black eyes, maybe glistening, reflection, and is horrified. Already had negative feelings about the children, and a sort of sense that something wasn't right, but then is horrified by seeing this. Then he closes the door on them, locks it, and retreats into his home or apartment, with feeling traumatized and fearing that there may be further encounter with these spooky kids. Although, according to Weatherly's book, that's not typical. If you have a black-eyed child encounter, you're not likely, generally it seems from cases, to have another experience. It's not going to be recurrent. However, it seems that in some cases at least, encounters with these children may bring bad luck. And Weatherly cites a number of examples, a few of which some of which I've cited in my book, or I've cited a number of cases in the book from him. And I'll give you an example. A woman called Sharon, an Iowa in the USA based nurse, finished a shift at a hospital, I presume, and she went to pick up her child, her son, who I think had been staying with the parents overnight. And on the way home, she stopped at a convenience store to buy some cereal and milk, went into the store, came out, got into the car, and then when she glanced in her rear view mirror, she was shocked to see, sitting close to her son, unusually close, a strange boy, staring with jet black eyes. She was horrified. She jumped out of the car, went round, opened the back door, yanked her son out, ran back to the convenience store, and said to the assistant that there's someone in the car, And the man, after ascertaining that this person wasn't armed, the assistant went out into the area, checked the area, looked around the building, no sign of anyone. He turned off the car engine, withdrew the keys, I think closed the doors, and returned to the store and was minded to phone the police. But this woman, Sharon, allegedly felt that she didn't want that. She didn't go into details with the assistant, but she was afraid the police wouldn't believe her or would think she was nuts. However, she was too kind of traumatized to bring herself to drive back home in the car. So she phoned her husband, who quickly arrived, and she went home in her husband's truck with the son. The husband spoke to the assistant and looked around a bit himself, went back to the car that Sharon had been using, and got in and noticed a bad smell. It was a bit like sort of soiled nappies. And he checked the car, couldn't find any source for this sort of a bad smell, opened the windows and drove off, and within a few miles had an accident, wrapped his car around a lamppost, I think it was. The car was ruined, wrecked. He was taken to hospital. Someone spotted the accident. He was taken to hospital. He had a headache, which cleared up in the evening. But he was kept in hospital overnight. And then shortly after that, the son, the boy, became ill, had fevers, stomach ache, body sores, and the medical staff seemed to find, had difficulty in making a definite diagnosis. And Sharon and her husband, I think, asked family members or associates to pray, and eventually he did recover. So in this case, you've got the kind of the encounter with the black-eyed child, the fact that the child actually invited the strange creature, the strange entity, into the car. It seems from what Sharon learned from her son, that the son didn't notice the black eyes. That's the impression I got from reading the account, that the boy didn't. It was just, he thought this was someone who'd come home with him and to play together.
Yeah.
But the bad luck did follow very, very quickly, as I say, after the encounter. There's another case that Weatherly cites, a woman called Beth, who encountered two black-eyed children. One of them took a grip on her, I think it was a girl, took a grip on her wrist. She managed to shake that off, close the door on them. And she didn't sleep that night, which may have just been sort of trauma of such a sort of spooky experience. The next day, she was sick with a stomach virus. Following day, reportedly, a car was broken into and a laptop was stolen. And then the next day, she lost her job, and her boyfriend, whom she'd been, associating with for 7 years, broke off the relationship. So again, a stream of bad luck following very quickly after a black-eyed child encounter.
So this is, we've sort of moved a little bit towards black-eyed children here, but can maybe explain what you think a black-eyed child is?
Well, in the book, I look at various possibilities. I mean, the one, for example, one possibility is that there's a sort of relation between black-eyed children and sort of aliens of UFO lore, because the aliens in UFO, the greys and so on, have black eyes, although of different sort of shape to those of the kind of types of case described by Weatherly. Another possibility is that they're basically manufactured paranormal phenomena, possibly apparitional, or tulpas, manifestations of kind of materializations. Um, Another possibility is that black-eyed child encounters. This is a kind of theory that I've kind of floated. I'm not saying it's true, but are basically false memories. Imagine you've got some kind of paranormal force that's able to manipulate your memory, and it decides to target you on a particular evening when you're alone. It takes over your mind, as it were, and edits your memories so that at the end of that evening, you have a very vivid recollection of a black-eyed child encounter, which scared the sort of diarrhea out of you. um, but it didn't physically happen, or didn't actually experience. What happened was your memory has been edited. I know I'm using false memory in a different way from the way that it's
Yeah,
conventionally used by psychiatrists to account for,
yeah.
reports of abuse and so on. But memory editing, and in other words, it's a memory phenomenon rather than a perceptual phenomenon. So various possibilities.
I find it interesting because I actually find the idea that there's something out there that could change my mind much more disturbing than the idea of the curse,
Yes,
because that's a bigger issue for everyone, really.
yes.
So it is. So obviously you're going through this with your book. No, I'm not actually put a picture of your book up, so I'm going to do that now. I should have done that at the start. So here's your book. It's Curses, Coincidences, and Malign Influence, a Parapsychological Perspective. Now, we were talking about what what is a curse and how they happen, but do you believe? Well, I mean, you've written this book. You've asked the question: do curses work? Do you think I can make a curse that could hurt someone if that's what I wanted to do?
I don't know, but what I'd say is that looking at the overall evidence, including the evidence from experimental research, I think it's possible that our feelings about other people can have an influence. Where, as I say, whether or not there's a formal ritual, the
Mm.
ritual might enhance it, perhaps in some cases.
Might
Um,
focus the mind, maybe using the
Yes, yeah. I mean, the problem is that if I suppose if there is a cursing ritual, that there's been a cursing ritual. You know that you've been targeted, and then
mm,
you crash your car. There could be prosaic explanations. It could be that you've taken the
yeah.
curse seriously. You're anxious. Because you're anxious, you're not paying attention to the road. Because you're not paying attention to the road, you don't avoid the accident that could have been avoided.
You're upset, so therefore
Yes,
you're
yes.
doomed. But how does that work if I curse someone that that and they don't even know that I cursed them?
Well, that's it. I mean, it's hard to know. It's very hard to know. But there's another case I mentioned in the book. It was reported in a book by a woman called Mary Rose Barrington. She's recently died, an elderly psychical researcher. I first heard about the curse at a conference I was attending, and she was there, and we were at lunch and happened to be sitting next to each other. And it was a case from South London, and it was about two sisters. And one of the sisters had pooled her resources with her mother. Her mother wasn't very wealthy, but and bought a house. And then after some years, they bought another, or the sister who bought the house bought another one, and it property in London, as you know, has kind of over the years has kind of gone up greatly in price. The other sister, initially, when this money was kind of pooled by the mother, um, was resentful, feeling that she'd been kind of not being treated the same way as her sister. And according to Barrington's account, as the price of the property went up, or the second house at least went up, this resentment kind of escalated dramatically. And Barrington cites an instance that suggests there was great resentment on the part of the other sister, who was actually living in rented accommodation during this period. But poltergeist phenomena developed at the home of the sister who was living with her mother and other members of the family. And they involved breaking of windows and so on. And this went on for a long time. The police weren't able to catch any perpetrator. A chicken wire eventually had to be placed over the windows to stop them being smashed. And an investigator from the Society for Psychic Research, Maurice Gross, suggested to the woman, could it be maybe it's a poltergeist case? And around that time, phenomena developed within the house. Now, the problem, there's often also a problem with these cases. Problem with this case was that the husband of the aggrieved sister, even though an adult, he had apparently had a catapult, and he used to use, So the possibility is that this man, maybe out of jealousy about his sister-in-law, was secreting himself somewhere in the area and taking out the windows, maybe with accomplices. But when it starts to be poltergeist phenomena within the home, where he couldn't possibly have been involved, the idea of a paranormal influence is obviously much stronger. But again, it's one of those cases where you could say, well, maybe this resentment, this bitter resentment by the sister and maybe by her husband towards the sister, was somehow deliberately, via a cursing ritual or unconsciously or just by wishes or negative thoughts, was unleashing this destructive activity. But it's very hard to know for sure, because it could be that the poltergeist phenomena would have occurred anyway. One of the things I should have perhaps added is that the aggrieved sister's son didn't get on terribly well, it seems, with the parents, and went to stay, spent some time staying with the other sister, with his aunt, which maybe was a further insult to the kind of aggrieved sister. And this young man, kind of had a kind of fascination with physical displays of strength and so on. I'm not quite sure what Barrington was referring to there, but he could have possibly been a poltergeist focus. The other point, this is a very speculative point, which I make in the book, is that we have to consider the possibility that with poltergeist cases, we often think that there's a focal person, around whom the phenomena occur. But it could be, if you take this curse idea seriously, is that sometimes an intelligence that's operating a curse could utilize these people to carry out a vendetta. In other words, if poltergeist phenomena surround you and you're the presumed focus, maybe you're being used, by some other person or entity or intelligence to perpetrate a curse. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty here, but there are lots of fascinating cases.
You've raised quite a lot of issues that I never actually thought about when you sort of came to me with this idea of do curses work, and the book, and as the book's now available, I think you get it on Amazon. Is that right?
It's available on Amazon, yes.
It's on Amazon, and we'll put the link on down below here on YouTube, and people will be able to purchase it. But I think you've raised so many issues that relate to this that I'm surprised you're able to fit it all into one book.
Yes. Well, I could have. The cases I've cited are a selection. I mean, there are lots. I suppose I could have bunked it out with a lot more. And I must say that some of the cases I've looked at, I'm not convinced by. Others that are more intriguing. The Barrington case is intriguing because I think my impression of her was a very positive one. A thorough kind of researcher and sensible person.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for that, Peter. We'll put the link on there. It's always a pleasure. If people want to maybe put in the comments any questions for you, Peter, because I know you do like to come back and respond to them, what people ask you on YouTube, and maybe people have their own thoughts about curses and maybe their own examples of cursing people. Hopefully people don't curse people, or maybe being cursed themselves. So it'd be really interesting to hear what they have to say. So anyway, once again, Peter, you have a good one. I'll be sending you my good thoughts. Hopefully everyone else will be sending good thoughts and no bad ones.
Thank you very much.
You have a great day.
Thank you.